Welcome back to the show. We just heard a harrowing story about the reality of the war in Ukraine, but now we're going to shift to the United States' involvement in this and how this has really moved the needle for Ukraine and for Russia. So, Adam, the Trump-Zelensky meeting 2 weeks ago was obviously a diplomatic disaster. I mean, everybody that watched it saw it. In fact, I think it was, to be honest with you, staged to end up like that. But what we saw was a big scramble in the Oval Office, and now things have fallen apart. So, from your view, what ignited that blow up, and how is this scramble power? How did this scramble the power dynamics? And what kind of situation are we in now with Putin dangling a ceasefire with a laundry list of demands?
Well, I'm going to agree with you here. It did seem very staged. And what I want to say is that those who've been following the Russo-Ukrainian conflict very closely began speculating as early as early January, that the United States under Trump would find a way to make Ukraine into the bad guy and to portray them as being the warmongers. Right. I mean, Trump has been trying to blame Kyiv and Zelensky for continuing the war, even though they're just defending their country. And when you watch the full recording of that meeting, it's 45 minutes. The first 35 minutes were perfectly cordial, right? So you had Trump and Zelensky complimenting each other. They obviously had different understandings of the war. Zelensky emphasized the suffering of his people, the fact that 20,000 Ukrainian children were kidnapped at the beginning of the invasion and are now being Russified. And their parents are still, trying to get their kids back. The fact that there are Ukrainian POWs who are being tortured, beaten, and starved. Meanwhile, Trump would try to create moral equivalencies between two sides. And Zelensky was pretty good at keeping his cool. At one point, he muttered, "They came into our country."
Yeah.
But I think in that situation, he did as well as most people can. At the very end, Zelensky raised a very reasonable argument, which is that Russia has continuously and habitually broken any ceasefire that Ukraine has signed. Because let's not forget that Russia first invaded eastern Ukraine in 2014 in a limited fashion.
Right.
So they've had multiple ceasefires. Russia has broken them. And so Zelensky said, well, where are the security guarantees, right? Because we can try to solve this diplomatically. Diplomacy hasn't worked. And if they invade us again, what will protect our country and our people? And at that point, J.D. Vance really began to freak out in a way that was disproportionate to the tone and reasonableness of Zelensky's points. And then they began hectoring him, and it fell apart from there. And it felt like it was manufactured reality TV.
Yeah, a little bit. I think we're very much on the same page with that. So, you and I were talking about this last week, actually. With the U.S. waffling on this, we may be looking at a new nuclear arms race, because all these sort of medium powers now don't feel like they've got the defense from America. Can you expand on that a little?
Sure. I mean, the main reason why we haven't had nuclear proliferation over the past few decades is that most medium-sized countries have felt safe under the United States' nuclear umbrella. Right. So Japan, for example, has known that if it gets into a conflict with China, the U.S. will be there. Europe has known that if Russia becomes more aggressive, the United States will back them up. Now, with the United States proving itself to be an unreliable ally, you've seen a significant increase in interest in building nuclear arsenal in South Korea, especially since the North Koreans came and sent their troops to Ukraine as well as Japan. And now there are increased conversations about whether the United Kingdom and France's nuclear arsenal provides an umbrella that could protect Germany or Eastern Europe. There are conversations about whether Germany should develop its own nuclear weapons. And of course, Poland is very interested in bolstering its defenses. And you could see nuclear armaments in Eastern Europe in the medium term. Now, the problem here is that once these countries get nuclear arsenals, there is no way they're going to give it up, because there's only been two countries that have given up their nuclear arsenals in the past. So South Africa, and I don't know too much about that situation, but then Ukraine. Ukraine had the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world in the early 90s, which it inherited from the Soviets.
Right.
Which doesn't mean that the Russians gave to them, because Ukraine, its people, its engineers helped build that arsenal. And they gave away those weapons in 1994 in exchange for security guarantees that turned out to be useless. So any country that gets nuclear weapons is going to say, well, we're never going to give this up, because we saw what happened with Ukraine, and we don't want that to happen to us.
Right. So basically, you're going to see nuclear proliferation around the world, and this is going to be a much bigger problem, because, like you said, once they have their finger on a button, they're not going to take it off. We got about 30 seconds left. How much do you believe America's wavering commitment played a role in Putin's new position?
I think Putin has been fairly consistent in his foreign policy goals, and I think that he's manipulating the Trump administration. And I think that the MAGA movement is going to be sorely disappointed in its foreign policy in a few years.
Right. So really not that significantly. He pretty much had a plan. He's sticking to it. And Trump is maybe giving him a little extra air to breathe. But you think this has been pretty much the plan all along?
More or less.
Yeah. Okay. We'll be right back.